Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Olive Podcast. So today's episode is going to be a bit different from the usual. I wanted to discuss a few topics with a few friends because I thought it was a good idea to have different opinions, and sometimes it's just nice to have those discussion sessions or brainstorming sessions where you also get to know other people's opinions, and other people might think and see things differently, and that might help you as well to figure out different things. So today we have three friends of mine here. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Kevin.
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
Hi, my name is Philip.
And in today's episode, we wanted to talk about just discussing how to build a relationship with God, basically. I think we all have different experiences of faith. I don't know how. Let's start with a simple question. How long have you guys started your journey with God from?
From the womb.
Wow!
From conception.
Literally.
Before he knew me.
I think mine was from a very young age when we used to live in Botswana. So I think I was about 7, 8.
Okay.
6, 7, 8. Because I think my parents found Christ when I was still living in Kenya, and they were in Botswana. And I remember getting a phone call from my auntie, who was very excited, ran into the room. Kevin, you never guess what? Guess what? Like, your parents have got saved. I was like, from what? Was it an accident? Like, what's it? Because at that age, you don't know what being saved is. Yeah. And so I think when I went to be with them in Botswana, we used to, because they used to go to the cell group a lot. So I got mixed up in lots of church events and going to cell groups or going to church every Sunday, going to Sunday school. And I think it was at that point where I found some sort of relationship with God. And I think it was during that struggle of, because remember moving to a different country is a whole different ball game. Whether you're growing up, whether you're a child. I had no idea at that point. I hadn't made any friends. I didn't know what was happening. And I think that really established my relationship with a friend, even though I didn't know who God was at that point. I knew there was something about faith that drew me close to God at that from that age. But I would say that I probably got saved later on in my life, but I started that connection with God at that age.
Yeah, that's nice. What about you?
I mean, not safe, but again, grew up in a very Christian household. One of my earliest childhood memories is being in church and being at the overnight conferences where you don't know why you're there during bedtime. It's cold. People are doing strange things, saying strange things, and you're just there going, are we going home now? And taking such a long time to understand and conceptualize what was going on in front of me. And again, it's like, you're a Christian because you went to church, you're a Christian because your parents said you're a Christian. But for me, I think it was really when I moved out of the house where I really tried to understand what the difference was between my parents' relationship with God and my own relationship with God. And I think at that point, it was only when I started to make my own decisions as to, whether or not I went to church, how often I prayed, how often I read the Bible, then I really sort of understood what it meant to be a Christian, and obviously all of the trials and tribulations that comes with it, and that was basically for me.
I think mine's quite similar to Rebecca. I was born in a Christian home. Both my parents were Christians. I remember just going into church, waking up Sunday morning early just to get ready, quite similar to yours actually. It's like, why are we going to church, singing weird things in church and not being able to question it, because you don't talk back or like stuff like that. And my dad was growing up as well. My dad was a deacon within the church, and my mum was one of the leaders in Sunday school as well. So there was that expectation of us to be involved in everything, and but just to I had that personal relationship when I moved out home and I went into uni. So I met a group of friends who were Christian as well, and it felt nice just being around Christians where you didn't have to pretend that you were someone else, and just fellowshipping together as well. I made the effort to actually seek and get to know God for myself, and build that relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting because if I reflect on my experience, I think it's a mixture of both. Because obviously, I was born and raised in a Christian household as well. There was always that thing of going to church every Sunday. There's a lot of involvement as well. But then I started my relationship with God quite early as well, like Kevin was saying. But also it got a lot deeper when I moved out of the house, because then I think when you grow up you have that better understanding of who God is, and you also you develop it for yourself and not just for what you've sort of been told. Okay, so the first question, because the topic is how do we build a relationship with God, the first question that really came to my mind is how would you start a relationship with God, and especially given that all of you already have that relationship with God, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is looking to start a relationship with God, and what sort of steps or practical advice would you give?
So I think for me, I'd approach it two different ways. I very much, obviously being from a Christian household, observed a lot, so fell under the misconception of what it looked like to be a Christian and imitated a lot of behavior at the beginning, and it sort of took a lot of stripping back for me to understand the difference. And I think for me, I would say it's like you start in any new friendship. Meeting someone for the first time, you start with simple things. What's your name? Who are you? What do you like? And I think sometimes we create such a vast gap between ourselves and unreachable God. And if we take the time to understand who He's meant to be to us, then we understand, the same conversations you have with your father, the same conversations you have with your friend, and not seeing as such an unreachable, He's taken away that divide, so we don't have to be so separated from Him, so you can approach Him with confidence and just building conversation, conversation as in prayer, build in, frequency of talking to someone, the same way you would with a friend. How do you spend time with them? You ask how they're doing, you talk about yourself, you go through good times and bad times together. And I think for me, that really helped to kind of break down that understanding of what I'm meant to be like and what the true relationship actually looked like.
I think for me, coming on from what you were saying, Rebecca, in terms of starting that relationship, especially for a new believer or someone who's inquiring about faith, my question would be, what's your intention behind it? I think once you know the reason as to why you want to start a relationship with God, I think it should set you already at a very good place. Because you have so many people who come into faith, who come into Christianity because they're either trying to run away from something or trying to find a gap that will fill, or something that will fill in the gap of what they're missing. And at that point is when they find that God, the God that they thought would fill that void doesn't do that. Everything just falls apart. So for me, it's knowing why you want to have this relationship. Question yourself deep intently. Why do you want to start this relationship with God in the first place? And then when it comes to once you've figured that bit out, once you've answered that question for yourself, for me, it's just starting by just inquiring, or because I'm very careful not to say, follow this person, look at this person, watch this YouTube clip, or because at the end of the day, exactly. And what you tend to find is even on social media right now today, you'll find there's a lot of false teachers who teach you the wrong thing, and that's where the Bible encourages you to seek. It's more relationship based, and that's what Jesus came to teach us. It wasn't about a Christian body in itself, or it wasn't about a religion. It was about the relationship that you have with Him. And for me, it's you have to find that path yourself first. So even if it's picking up the Bible and reading from Genesis all the way to Revelation, just doing something like that, just read it like a story and see how you connect with it. And then from there, you just talk to people like what you're doing right now, talking to people, different people about their different experiences, but not allowing yourself to succumb to what someone. So because sometimes you find people say you have to believe it, or otherwise you go to hell. And I think that's what's so scary about faith nowadays, is that it tends to preach more negative rather than more positive. Because if you tackle it, if you don't have this relationship with God, then you're all doomed. There's nothing you can do for yourself. You have to get to a point where you have to follow Christ. If you don't have Christ in your life, then that's it for the rest of your life. For me, it's you have to figure out how to think about how Jesus came and approached his message. You think about the difference between the Pharisees and the sinners. He even when the Pharisees were coming to attack him, he didn't go back and start chastising them. He spoke to them in a very calm and a very relaxed way. And for me, that's how you should approach your relationship with God, knowing that He is very welcoming. He said, let the little children come to me. So because people were saying, no, hold them back. So when he was talking about the little children, he was talking about, for me, he was talking about the new believers, he was talking about the sinners, he was talking about people who don't have that relationship with Him, because you have people who block you from going from church if you don't go looking a certain way, if you don't go dressed a certain way. For me, it's actually finding out within yourself, cleaning you. It's like this is the reason why I want to be in this relationship with God, because this is what I'm seeking right now. If it's for materialistic stuff, if it's for doing this, figure that out for yourself first, and then once you found that, just start.
I really resonate with what both of you said, like Rebecca, especially the first point on understanding that God is not this super far away figure that you don't really understand, but just understanding that He's a person and different from us obviously, but is someone that you can have that relationship with. And what you were saying, Kevin, as well, about understanding why, I never really thought about that, but I think a lot of people sometimes approach it as, maybe I want to be a Christian because I want to feel better than others, or I want to have this and that, and I want to receive this from God. And again, I think if you approach it with the mindset of it's a relationship, you understand that it's not a one way. It's not I want to get these things from God. It's what do I receive from God, but also what do I give to God, and it's like a two-way. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, because I was just thinking as well, because sometimes it might not also be a bad thing if you wanted, like with your intent or why, because it can start off as maybe wanting something because I feel like as Christians, or even before we become believers, or we have that relationship, we hit something like changes in our life. Something has to change where you feel like, I need, whether you feel like there's a void that needs to be filled, and if you want God to fill that void, it's about seeking Him, the right way. But so I don't think maybe sometimes your intent might be to gain, to benefit, but at the same time that might not be a bad thing, because God says come as you are, and sometimes we're trapped by religious views and religious the way things should be, but God wants us to come just as we are, who we are, even as sinners, and because He creates that beautiful space for us to come in and get to know Him.
Nice. That was a lot of good ideas.
I liked what you said about sometimes your intentions not necessarily being for the right reasons, or sometimes maybe even accidentally falling into a relationship with God, and sometimes you find yourself completely different place to where you originally set out. I mean, I guess the question is, as Christians, how do you then know the difference, especially as a new believer? Like, how do you understand what is a challenge and what is normal?
Is that challenge in terms of keeping the relationship with God, or starting? Like
starting a relationship with God, because again, you can go online and you can see what Christians look like. You might have already preconceived idea of what Christians should be like or are like, and sometimes even once in a while you hear certain things about Christians and you go, I don't know any Christians like that, but the world has a very specific view of what a Christian is. As a new believer, some of those can pose itself as challenges, and how do you embody this new sense of self?
I think for me, one of the there was a day I sat down and I said to myself, I wonder what it is about Christianity that we're so separate from each other. Why do we have so many denominations? When you look at Islam, it's just one Islam. I assume.
Yeah.
I
I mean, there's two main.
Yeah.
There's two main.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's
But
not
it's two. It's not like a million.
Yeah.
So you don't have the Protestants, you don't have the SDA.
Yeah.
So it is so many, and I think with those that, correct me if I'm wrong, with the two main Islam, do they follow the same?
Yeah.
But when you have Christianity, when it comes to so many denominations, there's so many, there's so many rules, so many regulations.
Sometimes they contradict themselves.
Exactly. So I think for me, if I was a new believer and if I was starting my journey in my relationship with God, and all of this was represented, I'd be like, so where do I fit?
Which Christian am I?
What do I do?
That's a very good question.
Which shade is my foundation?
Because I speak to a lot of Christians whose parents either were brought up as Catholics, were brought up as Protestants, but then they want to find. They want to go to a different. Maybe they want to be a Seventh Day Adventist. Do they go
war
against
in the house?
Exactly. Because sometimes even with Christianity goes down to the cultural aspect of it. So when you think about, especially coming from Africa, there's Christianity is heavy. In Africa.
It's a war zone.
And I wouldn't say it's heavy in a positive.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say it heavy in a negative. It's just so heavy. But then you also have to sit down and ask yourself, when the colonization happened, that's when we first learned about Christianity and the Bible, and that's how. So before that happened, what happened before? So I think when it comes to that, when you're presented with all of that, you just sat there like, listen, maybe this is for me.
Yeah.
And again, when you hear so many people going down the streets preaching hellfire, if you don't believe you're going to go to hell, and then if you sin you're going to go to hell. But you're always bound to sin.
I mean,
we're all human.
I mean, to be honest, I think for me, like, as coming into Christianity, you understand that there is, like with every religion, there's do's and don'ts. I think for me is then, like, in one church they can preach the same topic, and then you go to another church and those topics are not matching up, and you think to yourself, as a new believer, you're already trying to grow, trying to learn, you're conflicted between the world and God and God's will, and then you then go into where should be a straightforward, safe space, and then you find more confusion there than ever before. And I could read the same verse to you and somebody would come up with a reason to punish someone with that same verse, and someone will come up with the same reason to save someone with that same verse, and it's like, how do you, that's why I always take it back to your own personal relationship. I think the source is the only way forward, because I can sit in church and sometimes the pastor will say something and I'm like, I don't get that. But then you go back to the source and you go, okay, I get that. Or you go, I'm not sure I agree. But then you have to be in a position where you can openly challenge things. And if you find you're not in that position, find a position where you can openly ask questions. Because I think as Christians, there is no such thing as don't ask questions, keep quiet, obey. No, like talk, ask questions, grow in knowledge and understanding, grow in wisdom of who God is, not just my understanding of what I think God is, and I think that's, for me, I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, because I think also when you are accepting someone else's version of God, idea of God, or their concepts, then it does sort of going to break your relationship with God, because it's going to affect how you see Him. And I'm thinking what you were saying as well about just having discernment and going back to the source. I think especially as a new believer, what I would do at least, and it's something that I still do nowadays as well, listen to different people and not just take one person and just accept everything they're saying. And also with whatever you're listening from different people, having that discernment of going back to the source, going back to the Bible, checking scriptures. Even if you don't have that huge understanding of scriptures, I think when you pray and you ask God to show you, you do get that level of discernment. And to be honest, I think sometimes the level of stuff that's being said out there, it's so obviously wrong that if you just read the Bible, you would understand.
You feel like,
that is, completely wrong.
I mean, and He's given us a helper, He's given us the Spirit, and I think sometimes we forget that is what the Spirit is for. That is who He's meant to be. Every time you have questions, every time there's certain things, it's kind of like there's always somebody you can fall back on that helps direct you and helps guide you. So even as new believers, everybody has the same Holy Spirit in them throughout. The pastor has the same Holy Spirit that you have, and that for me comforted me a little bit, because it's not like, okay, well, when you reach this level, you can tag in on this level Holy Spirit, you know, like. So it gives me the confidence that I know that, okay, if it's discernment I want, and I know I'm praying about discernment, and I feel like my discernment is growing, that is not my own works, that's from the Spirit, you know, and that kind of gives you that confidence to be able to sort of walk a little bit more freely, I would say, you know.
I suppose one of the biggest things when it comes to challenges of a new Christian or starting a relationship with Christians is the misconception that Christians are very boring.
Come to church, you find out.
And you feel like you miss out on life. Because the thing is, you can argue that statement, because we live in this world, and everything you see in this world is geared towards everything against Christianity, everything about the relationship with God. And so if you choose to go against the world, then the world's not going to be kind to you. So that I think that's one of the biggest challenges that people have when it comes to faith, when it comes to starting a relationship with God.
Sometimes you lose friends, you lose people that you thought cared about you, you know, and sometimes, you know, it feels like too much of a cost, and not understanding what you're gaining from it, especially at the beginning where you're still trying to make sense of everything, and you're kind of like, well, what's this all for? You know, what's the point? I just feel like every time I turn that, and sometimes even constantly mocked, like, but it's just it's crazy.
I think that's why it's so important as well, especially in the beginning, to have that sort of community, or like to create like friendships with people that are already on that path, or that are engaging in that journey with God, because it does help to have someone close to you that is helping you, supporting you, and
definitely.
Well, again, not to bash my family.
Oh dear.
My Christian family. But as Christians, as much as we try not to, I found a lot of Christians that tend to be the most judgmental people.
Say it again.
On this, and it's so bad. And I gave the example earlier. You know when I spoke about how if you don't dress a certain way, if you don't look a certain way, if you don't act a certain way, then you're not going to be welcome into the church. So you can have someone who literally has rolled up from the club the night before.
I said, I need God.
Maybe they're hungover. Maybe they're dressed a certain way.
It's not a good look.
maybe they've been driven to come to church on that day, and you turn them away because you don't like the look of them. I mean, that's enough to put you away from Christianity for the rest of your life, because you're led to believe that these people are here to welcome you. But then you walk through those doors and not today, man, not today, sir.
And I really agree with what you're saying, and it really made me think that a lot of times, I think, at least I've seen in my life, a lot of people being hurt so much by the church that's what drives them away. And I think, something that I like to remind, not just myself, but especially like people that I know, people that maybe are not believers or Christians yet, I try really hard to remind them that although yes, people in the church unfortunately can hurt you, that doesn't mean that it was God. People, unfortunately, I mean, we are meant to be the representatives of God on earth, but sometimes it's not always like that.
Just human, and I think sometimes we forget that we are still human, still fighting the same battles, still going through the same things, and yes, there's more knowledge, yes, there's more understanding, but does not mean it's also reflected in yourself, you know, in your actions. And again, you know, I always feel like there's always a process. You did not walk into church the same way the first time you came in, you know, and it's funny because sometimes you see certain people's journeys just because you're just around them and you observe, and sometimes I think we very quickly forget about grace too quickly as Christians, because we are now enjoying the grace that God's given us. We forgot what that cost in the beginning and how much we had to give for that grace. And I think sometimes, especially as Christians, we now hold this worldview, and I think it comes from a bit of fear, where it's kind of like, oh, if you step in here, you're gonna corrupt the flock, and you know. And I mean, I get that, because sometimes, you know, again, you know, even Paul says, you know, if you spot something bad within, you know, you cast them out. But at that point, it should be corrected first and given time to be corrected, not just kind of like, oh no, we see another sinner coming our way, shut the gates before they know we're open, you know. But again, you know, you'd be surprised where I think even for me personally, like it put me off a lot of black churches for a very long time, because I grew up in, we went to very different experiences of churches, and there was a time I just said, if this is what it means to be a Christian, not for me, absolutely not for me. Like, this is a joke, absolute joke. And I think again, growing up and gaining new understanding helped me understand that what I saw was not Christianity. And there's a label of, like you said, religion, Christian, Muslim, you know, all of that, like the outward label has no reflection of what's inside. And I think that helped me a little bit to find a safe space, but I had to hunt for that safe space, you know. And even as a new believer, you can go to one church, two churches, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you're thinking, what on earth is this? But keep searching. Keep searching. It took me up until the age of like 23 to find a church I thought, I think they're sane. Like, I think so. You know, you still have a few weird ones, but you know.
So it's definitely not an easy thing, I think, to start a relationship with God but I think we discussed a lot of good points, and especially I thought it was really interesting to talk about the challenges, because I think a lot of times, you know, as a new believer, even as a believer that's already started the journey with God, we all encounter challenges, and a lot of times maybe you don't have that support, you think you're the only one going through that, and instead I think knowing that other people have gone through that as well helps you a lot. So thank you so much for joining and for your inputs. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video, and make sure to tune in for the next one.